You're listening to Puma Podcast.
On November 15, 2010, Leonard Co, one of the country's most respected botanists, who spent decades researching the flora of the Philippines, was shot dead. His two guides, Forest Ranger Sofronio Cortez and farmer Julius Borromeo, were also killed. It was an ordinary day for them. They were in Cananga Leyte to conduct research and collect seedlings from indigenous trees in the area. That's until soldiers of the Philippine Army's 19th Infantry Battalion saw them and mistook them for members of the New People's Army. That's when the bullets started raining. "13 years after their killing, the quest for justice continues for the victims' families. In 2013, the Justice Department charged the 9 troops involved in the incident with reckless imprudence resulting in multiple homicide. In response to this resolution, Co's family has petitioned the DOJ to raise the charges to murder, but the case remains unresolved to date. I'm Franco Luna, Puma Podcast for Teka Teka. Today we remember Leonard Co with this special episode produced and hosted by Trisha Aquino.
Before the Philippines knew the name Leonard Co, he was just a guy who really, truly loved plants.
I first met Leonard in the late 70s when he was doing a lot of field work and finishing his courses at the University of the Philippines, Baguio. So we became friends, and by that time, I was very well aware that he was doing the research on medicinal plants in the Cordillera.
That was conservationist and historian Rowena Reyes Bukirin, a retired professor of UP Baguio.
He was a long-time coffee mate. And that's the kind of discussion I really enjoyed discussing with Leonard, because I don't think you have a lot of people who know that Bahay Kubo is about vegetables introduced to the Philippines. All of those vegetables and fruits were not from the Philippines. They came from China and Mexico. But most of those from Bahay Kubo were really introduced during the contact period, pre-colonial to colonial years.
Leonard wasn't a stuffy academic. In college, he was a member of the UP Mountaineers. And in professional and academic circles, he carried himself with an informality and roughness that said, "I have nothing to hide." Anthony Arbias, a native plants conservationist and eco-guiding expert, met Leonard decades later. Anthony, though, had long heard of the botanist in his circles.
Matagal ko nang naririnig yung pangalan niya dahil pareho kaming mahilig sa ferns or yung mga pako. So ako, more on yung gardening ng ferns, and siya naman is more on sa taxonomy and botany niya. One time, I received a text message from a common friend na mahilig din sa ferns na sabi, gusto daw ako makilala ni Leonard Co. Tapos gusto raw pumunta sa bahay namin para makita yung collection. Ang ginawa ko nung the day itself, lahat ng mga medyo rare at yung mga mahirap na makita mga botanicals na talagang magaling ka talaga para malaman mo. Medyo tinago ko siya sa mga likod-likod. So, nung dumating na siya, yan, pinakilala. Tapos dire-diretso, wow, ganyan-ganyan siya. Tapos nun, eagle eye siya. Kumbaga, nakita niya agad yung mga tago-tago. And then from then on, doon na nag-start yung friendship namin.
A chance encounter at a jeepney stop after that led to the two finally putting up Leonard's dream organization, something that would be dedicated to their mutual love for native plants. In 2007, the first meeting of the Philippine Native Plants Conservation Society was held in the bonsai garden of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. After getting registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Leonard, Anthony, and other like-minded friends eventually set up shop in a Bahay Kubo in the Ninoy Aquino Parks and Wildlife Center.
Doon ko siya nakatrabaho dahil nga nagkaroon kami ng mga MOA with DNR to make a re-inventory nung buong Ninoy Aquino Park. Tapos yun, marami nang sunod-sunod.
Anthony began joining Leonard in the field.
He was connected with parang two organizations nung nabubuhay siya. One is yung dun sa Institute of Biology sa UP, Diliman. And the other one is yung dun sa talagang main na trabaho niya, which is sa Conservation International Philippines. So ang ginagawa niya is nag-inventory ng mga areas, mga project sites ng mga organizations na yon. And then they do recommendations after. Yung mga iba naman ay nagbe-baseline siya because later on yung mga project sites na yun ay gagawing refo sites.
By refo sites, Anthony means reforestation sites. These are areas that have been damaged over the years, denuded, literally nakalbo, and need to be revived.
So to be able to have a very successful and sustainable na projects, kailangan mo muna kasing i-baseline. Kumbaga, aalamin mo muna kung ano yung mga andoon originally rather than yung basta pupunta ka na lang doon, tatanim ka na kung ano na gusto mo. So yun yung general objective niya. Tsaka nga yung parang yung personal niya is talagang dapat i-promote yung mga yung advocacy on native plants.
Leonard's work in botany and taxonomy took him all over the country. Taxonomy is basically the naming and categorizing of species. Which species are related and which branched out from where? How do you trace evolution moving forwards or back? Leonard did this with Philippine plants from the 1970s to the early 2000s. And Demto Anda was among those who saw him in action from the 1980s to the 1990s. Today, Demto is the editor of Palawan News. But back then, he was the program manager for Conservation International, and he was in charge of their projects in Palawan.
Leonard was already a popular figure in the conservation circles. When I say popular figure, it refers essentially to the reputation that Leonard has as a leading botanist in the conservation field. There's only a very small group of people who does the kind of work that Leonard Co did. No? And Leonard Co was primus pares among these scientists. No?
At the time, Palawan and Sierra Madre were priority areas for Conservation International.
I remember Leonard was also very much, most of the time in Sierra Madre. He was working on a forest plot there in Palanan, Isabela. Yung forest plot na yun was part of the network of forest plot, important areas in the globe, under the Center for Tropical Forest Science.
For a hotshot scientist, Leonard was what Demto called a very ordinary guy. Napaka-unassuming. Leonard was a lot of fun to work with. But he would really come to life in the field.
He hates to be in the office. He basically wants to be in the field all the time. The only time you can find him actively being animated inside an office setting is when you're discussing about plants or you're discussing about plans to go to the field. When we were scouting for areas of project areas, at one point we had to trek the river and he didn't want at first to ride the kayak boat. Sabi ko, bakit Leonard? Ba't ayaw mo magkayak? Kasi daw, hindi siya marunong maglangoy. Talagang terrestrial person siya. Pag nasa field work yan, gusto niya nagluluto ng pagkain nyo. He wants to talk a lot, Ang isang nagkaka-problema lang ako sa kanya noon, tatandaan ko, if we are in the field and we have to take walks, he always slows us down. Kasi pag maglalakad yan, lalo-lalo sa mga gubat, even in sparsely forested areas, ang bagal niya maglakad kasi lagi siyang tumitingin-tingin sa surroundings niya. Nagmulekta siya, tinitingnan yung mga dahon at yung mga puno.
Anthony can attest to this.
Every puno, every halaman, may kwento siya. So, halimbawa, isang puno, supposed to be 2 minutes lang yung allotted time lang dahil kinuha, prinases, in-identify. Halimbawa, bibigyan niya ng kwento ng 10 minutes bawat isa. So, imaginein mo yun kung 100 times 2 minutes. Ang laki agad nun. So, doon pumabagal yung trabaho. Plus, siya fan of wildlife. So, hindi lang plants yung gusto niya. Pag nakakita ng insekto, ng ibon, ng mga snails, ng mga snakes. Lahat yun, kumbaga tinitignan niya at pinipicturean niya.
Demto adds,
Even if we were in other places like in campus surrounding, in some other countries na may natural environment, when we walk between two buildings, he would slow us down kasi titingin-tingin siya lagi ng mga halaman sa paligid niya. That was Leonard.
Meron tayo mahigit 100 na species ng pigs. Sa mga 40 dyan, mga stranglers at tinatawag natin tinatawag natin baliti. So yung nakikita niyo rito, hindi bunga yan. Ano yan? Container ng flower.
so what exactly was Leonard's work? What did a botanist like him spend his everyday doing? Here's Anthony.
Gumagawa sila ng mga plots sa mga areas kung saan sila engage. Ang gagawin ay papasadahan muna siya. Ito, syempre yung una, merong mga communities doon, so hindi pwede dahil nga sira na yung vegetation. So aangat ka ulit doon sa medyo mataas na part, kaya lang may taniman naman. So wala na rin yung natural vegetation. So aangat ka ng aangat hanggang doon ka mapupunta sa medyo sulok-sulok ng bundok kung nasan pa yung mga natural na gubat. And then pag nandun na, edi maghahanap ka ulit ng yung mas ideal, kumbaga yung walang mga tinatawag na mga exotic trees. Halimbawa, wala nang presence ng mangga, ng nyog, ng avocado, at yung mga iba-iba pang mga halaman or mga puno na supposed to be wala naman doon dahil sila ay mga introduced species. So kapag na-reach na yung point na all natural na siya or all native, yun na siguro yung pipiliin na site. And then gagawa ng plot, so susukatin siya. Then pag nasukat na siya, kasama na lahat yung mga other assistant, yung mga tree climbers, yung mga porters, etc. Iisa-isahin na yun about isang puno doon. So una muna ay mga puno yung itatag at i-identify. Kung hindi ma-identify, aakyatin ng tree climber yung puno para kunin yung fertile part kung meron. So ang pinaka-importante ay kung meron siyang bulaklak, yun yung pinakamaganda. At kung meron din siyang fruits, mas maganda yon. So kung hindi siya matapos doon sa field, kung hindi magkatapusan kung ano talaga identification, iuuwi yung material na yon. Yun yung tinatawag na herbarium specimen. So ikakat yun, tapos iano muna siya, ilalagay sa supot, tapos iuuwi. Very laborious yung process na yon because biruin mo, iisa-isahin mo lahat yung mga puno doon sa isang plot. Pagkatapos nun, kapag meron pa mga interesting na mga halaman, ang tawag namin yung mga herbaceous, ito yung mga halaman other than trees. So halimbawa, pwedeng vine, pwedeng orchid, ferns, sinasama rin siya dun sa inventory.
And what is the value of this back-breaking, painstaking work? Here's Demto.
Napakalawak ng kanyang collection. Those collection of plants and plant photographs were very important not only to him, but to the scientific community. Eventually, he wrote that into a book. That was what I would say would be one of his major contributions to conservation science in the Philippines and in the world.
Anthony adds,
Isa sa mga official na na-publish niya nung bata pa siya, yung Common Medicinal Plants of the Cordillera Region. So talagang sinaliksik niya yung mga halaman na merong medicinal properties dun sa area at yun ay kanyang kinumpile. Pero yung composition nitong librong to ay both yung native tsaka yung mga exotic. Meaning yung mga, for the longest time, andun na rin siya, although galing siya sa South America, sa iba-ibang bansa. Pero nakita ng mga tao doon na meron palang may bisa sa katawan.
very valuable research for Filipinos in rural areas who don't have access to modern medicine. Anthony also talks about Leonard's major contribution to science.
Yung permanent forest dynamics plot sa Palanan sa Northern Sierra Madre National Park. Sa buong Pilipinas, ito yung pinaka-longest running na study plot. 20 years old na siya, na kumbaga every tree na hindi ko sure kung 1 cm or 2 centimeters up, lahat yun ay nakatag. So lahat siya ay may identification, pinapakita kung gaano yung growth rate niya, kung paano yung distribution niya, kung kailan ba siya nanganganak, yung mga puno doon. So isa siya doon sa mga, dahil isa siyang kumbaga benchmark when it comes sa pag-study ng mga halaman dito sa buong Pilipinas at sa buong mundo na rin. Kumbaga, greatly look upon yung study plot na yun sa Northern Sierra Madre National Park.
It was also Leonard who started the practice of the tree walk.
A tree walk or nature walk ay isang klase ng simpleng pag-trek or simpleng pagpasyal sa isang natural na gubat or pwede rin naman na nasa urban setting. Pero kinikwento mo yung tinatawag na natural history ng isang lugar at yung mga ethnobotanical values ng isang halaman. So siya yun. Kumbaga talagang yun yung personification niya na parang siya yung nag-popularize ng ganong klase ng approach sa conservation.
When we hear from Leonard's colleagues, it's clear just how much fascination our native flora held for him, how much he wanted to protect it and to preserve it for future generations. His friends also said Leonard was a photography enthusiast. He was always looking for the best angle from which to capture his beloved plants. He was continuously searching for literature about them as well. Pero what's the point? What does caring about our biodiversity have to do with us? Here's Demto.
Conservation is a lot of things, but it's essentially trying to save very important species of plants and animals that we have in our important environmental settings. No? Conservation is all about trying to keep these important areas in its purest as much as possible state. It entails a lot of work also. Basically, you have to understand what's going on in these important places. Only then can you be able to effectively intervene so that you are able to conserve or preserve these areas. Dapat nating maintindihan na napaka-unique ng Pilipinas. Napakaliit ng bansa natin kung i-compare natin sa continents ng Europe, ng Asia, ng Americas. Pero napakasiksik ng diversity ng ating mga plants and animals. Kaya nga tinawag na mega diversity country ang Pilipinas. Kumbaga meron kang mall, meron kang mega mall. Kung meron kang star, meron kang mega stars. Nakakalat yan na napakahalaga ng Pilipinas as a country for biodiversity conservation. Dapat po natin maintindihan yun bilang mga Pilipino na to conserve our biodiversity is not just to conserve our biodiversity for the purpose of doing science work, kundi we conserve our biodiversity not only for our generation, for our next generations, kundi as a legacy to the world. Kasi kailangan natin itong protektahan dahil wala nang kapalit ito.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Franco Luna. The episode where this came from was the first of a 3-part series called This is Leonard Co, a Taxonomy of Justice, supported by Internews Earth Journalism Network. This series was produced and hosted by Trisha Aquino, with additional research from Kat Ventura and Macy Hoven, and put together by Carl Sayat.